Just wanted to elaborate a little more on, and I'm live by the way, Canelo being stripped by the IBF and why ultimately it doesn't matter. It matters in the fact that another opponent has fallen through, and that's what Oscar's really aggravated about. You see Oscar's comments out there blaming the IBF, blaming Derevyanchenko. Really, they're embarrassed that they couldn't get the September opponent, and now they're struggling to get an October opponent. There's trouble in paradise between Canelo, Triple G, and the Zone right now, and getting fights made with the economics behind it. I'll talk about that in a minute. But as far as this goes, look, Oscar's not concerned about the IBF stripping Canelo. If he is, I have no sympathy for him. I have no sympathy for Canelo because I'm old enough to remember that when Canelo fought Matthew Hatton for a super welterweight belt at a catch weight of what, 150, 152, something like that, missed the weight by 2 pounds, I think, and was still able to fight for the belt, still allowed to fight for the belt. So no sympathy there if that's really what they're worried about, but they're really worried about the fight falling through. And they have IBF to blame for it and publicly and saying, don't point the finger at us. And point the finger at Derevyanchenko. Look, I understand why they're mad at Derevyanchenko, but Oscar's theory is that Derevyanchenko milked this thing, that they wanted to run out the clock, that they were never serious about fighting Canelo, that they asked for too much money in order for the fight to fall through, and then so the title could become vacant. It wasn't for a real title, but it was for a title. That was for a WBC title, I believe. So the IBF, if we're comparing the IBF to other sanctioning bodies, IBF is more straight-laced than those other guys, right? So IBF is more by the book, more by the rules than those other guys. They don't put up with a lot of the stuff that the other guys do. So not saying the IBF did that, but I believe that was for a WBC belt, a silver belt or something like that. But they did let Canelo slide there, and a lot of sanctioning bodies have let Canelo slide in the past. So the only reason I bring that up is, what's up, Brian David? What's up to everybody in the chat? The only reason I bring this up is if Oscar and Canelo's real beef here is that the IBF stripped them and that the WBC stripped them and gave him a franchise title to make up for it. I have no sympathy for him in that aspect because these sanctioning bodies have bent over backwards for Canelo in the past. And they've bent over backwards for a lot of Oscars fighters in the past. So amongst a lot of fighters at the top, but Canelo in particular. So if that's what they're worried about, I have no sympathy. But that's not what they're worried about here. They're aggravated because another fight has fallen through, and they're embarrassed by it. They're embarrassed that they couldn't get the September dates. They can't get the October date right now set, and they're blaming it on IBF, Derevyanchenko. They're letting those guys take the fall for it. But Oscar's theory in blaming Derevyanchenko here doesn't stand up to the test because here's what he's claiming that Derevyanchenko did. They ran out the clock, that they were waiting for this deadline to pass so the title can become vacant, and then Derevyanchenko can fight for the vacant title. Here's the issue with that is Derevyanchenko becomes the guy to fight for the vacant title. Who's his mandatory now? Triple G. So now Derevyanchenko is lined up to fight Triple G in October instead of fighting Canelo. So we have Derevyanchenko fighting what's probably going to be a tougher fight for him stylistically against Triple G for less money for the same title. So a lot less people are going to see him fight for the same title for less money. That's Oscar's theory here, and it doesn't stand up to the test. Why would Derevyanchenko pass up a shot at the king of boxing economically in Canelo? He is the guy that everybody wants to fight. Why would he pass on that fight, outprice himself on that fight, just to get the vacant title, fight for the vacant title against Triple G? It doesn't stand, and they know Triple G would be the mandatory. It doesn't stand the test here, but here's the real issue that I see is economically, it's a tough spot it's a tough spot to negotiate these fights now because what happened in the last fight in May? Canelo made $35 million to fight Danny Jacobs. He's got this deal with DAZN making $35 million per fight, which is a monstrous deal. Monstrous. The issue with that is you have to fit it into the budget of the fight. So you got Canelo making 35, then you had Danny Jacobs making right around 15 million, 12 to 15 million, but let's call it 15 million. So that's 50 million between the two fighters that they share. So, okay, that sets a market. It's like Michael Thomas just, if you're a football fan, he just signed a huge $20 million deal, record-setting deal for wide receivers. That resets the market for wide receivers. So now Julio Jones, who's up for contract, is going to make more than $20 million. Okay, so these fighters who are negotiating with Canelo and Golden Boy now in DAZN, they're saying, okay, Danny Jacobs made 15 million. I want 15 million. I want 12 to 15 million or close to it. The issue with that is Derevyanchenko is not Danny Jacobs. So yes, Derevyanchenko does deserve a lot of the blame here. But it's the market, it's the economics that are set up now to where it's going to be tough to make fights with Canelo because you're paying him so much. And then these other fighters are going to look at the market and say, well, if Danny Jacobs made this, I want this too. So Derevyanchenko priced himself out of this fight. He deserves some of the blame. If I'm Derevyanchenko's team, I would have took whatever it was, a 7 million or whatever, and got the fight. A lot of eyes on me, unless they were. The only way this stands up is if they thought this was too soon for Derevyanchenko, and they didn't want the Canelo fight. But once again, they got to fight Triple G now. He's the mandatory, so it's tough either way. But the economics make it tough, and it's like when Canelo signed that huge deal with Rock Nation. Remember the problem, the issues that they were having with, not Canelo, Cotto. When Cotto signed that big deal with Rock Nation, that 3-fight deal, I think it was like 50 million, something like that. And you're like, why are they paying this aging star? And I'm a Cotto fan, but why are they paying this aging star this much money? And they were having issues. One of the 3 fights were with Cotto, but I think two of the other fights they lost money on because they're paying him so much money. They overpaid him. It's like when the Lakers paid Kobe all this money late in his career, an aging superstar on one leg. And it's like, why are they paying this money? And it's why the Lakers are in the spot they're in right now. Yeah, I mean, the IBF, that's exactly what I'm saying. Look, the IBF is shady. They all are. But here's the thing with Canelo and why I say so what as far as the IBF belt. And I still maintain that they're not worried about the belt. They're not worried about it. He wants to unify the division, and that's why he has a little frustration about this. But he's not acting like a guy who wants to unify the division, right? He's acting like a guy who wants to. One day he's saying he's going to move up to 168. He's going to fight Kovalev at a catch weight, whatnot. So he's not really acting like a guy who wants to unify the division. But that's the only reason this somewhat matters. But here's the thing. He's going to find an opponent for October, maybe November. Derevyanchenko, let's say he fights Triple G, which it looks like is going to happen in October, let's say. And Canelo is going to be lined up once again after this happens later in the year to fight for the IBF belt against the winner versus Derevyanchenko and Triple G. So he comes right back to the same spot that he was in anyway. So that's why the IBF doesn't. It doesn't matter that they're stripping him, is my point. It doesn't matter. I would maintain that Oscar's embarrassed that he can't get Canelo these fights. That's what he's embarrassed by. And he's going to lash out at the IBF. He's going to lash out at Derevyanchenko's promoter, manager, and whatnot. But he has some of the blame with this as well. And at the end of the day, if you're a promoter, you got to get your guy fights. You got to get your guy fights, and there's trouble in paradise right now. But they're going to get him a fight for October. October, November, something like that is going to be an easier fight, unless they fight Andrade. Let me see what this says. We're now looking at it. It seems Canelo against Andrade for WBA and WBO, and that's what I'm saying. Like, if he fights Andrade now, unless Andrade prices himself out of the fight. He fights for the WBA and WBO, unifies those, and then he fights the winner of Derevyanchenko versus Triple G and unifies the IBF. All right, so he's right back where he started. Try and win legit at 168 belt. Look, I'm for that too. And I don't think Canelo has any issues moving up to 168. Like I've said before, he's he matches up really well against taller fighters. He matches up really well against taller fighters. He can get inside. He's not worried about making up that distance, getting inside, getting in the chest, digging to the body. And he's not going to have any issues moving up to 168, I think. So I don't think he's afraid of moving up to at 168 at all. But if he's going to stay at middleweight, Andre looks like it's going to be the look, right? In the fall. Should be Canelo versus Triple G, but Canelo is good too. Yeah, look, and everybody wanted, and DAZN wanted the third Triple G fight. That's why they signed Triple G. They wanted Canelo versus Triple G, the third, like all of us do. And you can say you don't want that fight or you don't need that fight, but everybody wants to watch that fight, man. People want to watch that fight. And that's the fight that DAZN wants. That's not the fight Canelo and his team wanted at the time. So once again, that's what I'm saying. Like, Oscar and Canelo have to take some of the weight, take some of the blame for this because they put themselves in a tough spot. And when you sign this big of a deal, you got to back it up. You got to fight top opposition. If you're not fighting top opposition, you got to at least fight somebody that's interesting, right? So there are a lot of fighters that Golden Boy is throwing out that DAZN is not really interested in. And Derevyanchenko was one that they were both interested in, but it looks like they can't pay Derevyanchenko what he feels he's worth, which he's not worth, but it feels like that's what Derevyanchenko thought he was worth. But just a mess. I wish they would announce a Canelo fight. Canelo is such a fun, and I don't mean to come off like I'm a Canelo hater at all because I'm a fan. I love watching Canelo fight. I love what he brings to the ring, but this is becoming a mess, man. It's becoming a laughing stock in boxing, but the reason I say so what is they're not worried about this IBF belt right now. They're just not. Canelo should have just fought Charlo and shut the Charlo's loneliness up. or lionesses up, but Canelo moving like Mayweather, shaking my head. Could have been Canelo versus Andre, and GGG would have walked into a chance of undisputed. Yeah. And look, if he's really concerned about unifying, the Andre fight is there now. Right? I mean, the Andre fight is there in the fall. That's the fight Andre has wanted. And Andre's been begging for big fights, so he says. Once again, a guy who his actions don't really line up by what he's been saying. But if he wants to back it up now, the fight is there. To me, it looks like the fight is there. And Andre should take what Derevyanchenko left on the table. He should walk right into that room, take what was offered to Derevyanchenko and say, hey, give me this. You offered this guy this. I have 2 belts. Give me that. But, I don't know, man. This is what happens when you give a Danny Jacobs $15 million is you set that market. Like I said, it's like with the Saints offering Michael Thomas, giving him $20 million. You set that market for wide receivers now, and that's what everybody expects. Canelo's becoming a diva. Look, that's what people have been saying about Canelo for years. Does he deserve some of that? Yeah. But at the same, and they've said that about Cotto as well in the past, that he's acted like a diva. Do these guys deserve that? To an extent, yeah. But Canelo, when he gets in there, man, he backs it up. And coming off of a Danny Jacobs fight, I had no issue with the light touch in the next fight, as long as it's Danny Jacobs, light touch, and then Triple G behind it in the third fight. And he's fought Triple G twice already, so he sort of deserved a light touch for this fall. But it doesn't look like he's going to get it because of that monstrous contract. When you sign a $35 million per fight contract, it's like what Cotto did with Rock Nation. There is no room for soft touches. DAZN's not going to say, hey, look, we got to maintain subscribers. We got to bring new subscribers into the door. So I have no issue with you fighting light touches. No. If they sign a guy to that big of a contract, they expect results. They expect big fights. And the only way to get results in big fights is if you're fighting big name fighters. and it looks like there's somewhat of a shortage of that. But Derevyanchenko deserves some of the blame too, man. I'll go back to that because this was a big fight for you. Big fight. Apparently they offered him a little more than what he was worth, and he still turned it down. Nonetheless, man, don't worry about the IBF. Don't worry about the IBF. Canelo doesn't need the IBF. Right now, at least he doesn't. If he wants to unify, he will, but he'll have that opportunity. It's not like the IBF is going to turn him down because they have another mandatory. GGG's whole career is light touches. No, I wouldn't agree with that. I wouldn't agree with that. Canelo's not a light touch. Fought him twice. And look, a lot of guys ducked Triple G as well, but that's another video for another time. The only reason I'm bringing this up, man, is and look for CalCast 5 coming later today. Going to talk a bit about Paul Williams. His birthday is this week in history. He was born in 1981 in this week, so I'm going to be talking about Paul Williams. Want to recap some of Paul Williams' fights, particularly Paul Williams versus Sean Bay Mitchell. So look for that video later in the day. But yeah, man, Canelo, IBF, don't worry about it because the IBF belt is going to be there for him later in the year or early next year or midway through next year in his next fight. If he wants to fight for the IBF again and get that IBF belt back, he'll get it, man. Or at least he'll have the opportunity to get it because Derevyanchenko versus Golovkin, unless Derevyanchenko beats Golovkin and then prices himself out of the Canelo fight again. But I don't see that happening. I think Golovkin takes care of Derevyanchenko, and then we get Canelo versus Triple G later next year. And it sets itself up clean and beautifully that if he fights Andre for 2 belts, wins the 2 belts, and then Triple G wins this IBF, they can unify. It sets itself up clean. So don't worry about the IBF, man, would be the takeaway of this video. And don't feel sorry for Canelo and Oscar if they are worried about the IBF. This is a gift for Triple G. Yeah, it is. It is a gift for Triple G because Derevyanchenko versus Triple G in October, DAZN is going to be happy about that. And this could set up nicely for DAZN, really, because they could get Derevyanchenko versus Triple G, and then they could get Canelo versus Andre, and then you have a semifinal there at 160. They would have the semifinal, and then they would have the championship later in the year, which I'm sure they'll want to be Canelo versus Triple G. Although Andre could give Canelo some issues stylistically, right? I don't think Derevyanchenko will give Triple G issues stylistically, but we'll talk about that in a separate video. As of right now, man, got to get back to work, so I'll hit y'all up later. Look out for the Paul Williams video later. Peace.